hey, can I do a last 10%? Do I get to do that?
Let's do it.
Oh, snap. This is going to be good.
He's excited.
Get your popcorn, everybody. How are my bags under my head?
That part there, we can't fix.
Can't fix that.
I just always, everybody tells me, "Oh man, Dave, you look tired, bro."
Dude, I bought some of those strips that you put on that the chicks wear. They work. Yeah.
You wear them at night?
Yeah, you put them on like in the morning or late at night, and it rejuvenates and everything.
I'm just doing cucumber slices while I'm in the tanning bed.
Yeah, right.
I've just resolved I'm going to be ugly.
Yeah. Well, see, you got glasses. It kind of covers
it. It does.
You know? Yeah, maybe I just need to just start wearing glasses.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All the way up.
Oh, no.
Anything else, Carrie?
No, y'all are great.
All right, good.
Awesome. All right, well, welcome to the Men's Alliance podcast, and we've got special guest Brian Hughes with us today. Brian is the pastor of Passion Community Church. Lots of campuses all around RVA and beyond, and got a couple of Men's Alliance tribes at a couple of those campuses. Ever since I met Brian a couple months ago, he's had a huge impact on my life and thus on Men's Alliance through leadership, mentoring, some great advice, some great book recommends. And so that's been awesome. And I appreciate that and how you're speaking into me and the ministry. But excited about having you on just to also hear your personal story. Just want to get to know you better and talk about all things church, men, and leadership.
Well, at least you don't go for it. At least it's not an aggressive agenda.
We're going to limit ourselves.
All right.
No warm-up questions.
All right. Well, I really am honored to be here, and I'm honored to be able to be invited to speak into your ministry and to your life, and I just feel like that's sacred space, and I think a lot of guys would be like, man, you know, if I got to speak into his life, that would be cool, and I just really appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
So what can I tell you? What do you want to know?
Man, so tell us a little bit, start off about your church, your ministry here in Virginia, and how that all got started in your life.
Well, the short version of the long story is that I didn't grow up going to church. My granddad was passionate about Jesus, and introduced me to Jesus as a young child, but he lived on the other side of town. My parents didn't go to church. They weren't bad people. They would tell you that they were believers in Jesus.
Yeah.
Not much of their lifestyle at that time reflected that, but they certainly, I don't ever remember my parents going to church. And so as I got older, my granddad introduced me to Jesus, and as a kid, you know, I took that seriously. But then, you know, as I became a teenager, went to college, that kind of fell by the wayside. I did a lot of partying, and we got married. We got pregnant and then married in that order, which is not the prescription. I would not advise it. Yeah. However, when my daughter, we kept partying, and when my daughter turned 2, she did what 2-year-olds do. She reflected her parent. 2-year-olds are mirrors.
Oh yeah.
And so when that happened, I one day I had this really life-altering experience, and I said to Susan, do I really act like that? Do I really talk like that? And I came to 2 conclusions. One is, I don't think this is the way I want to raise our kids, and I don't think this is the way I want to live my life. We need to make a change. And I said, I don't know what to do. And she said, well, maybe we should go to church. And we didn't know anybody that went. Everybody we knew was still sleeping it off on Sunday morning. We didn't know anybody that went to church. So we just went to the church on the main road where we lived, that I passed by when I went to work. And I can be a strong personality. I was determined to change my life. But everything about that experience was me an outsider. It was me a come here, not a been here. The whole thing was weird. Like everything about it. They all knew no one stood at the front of the room and said, all rise. Like if they do that like they do in court, then you know when to stand up.
You know the script.
But no one said all rise. Everyone just knew when to stand up. Yeah. And they knew when to, it's like watching a flock of birds. They just all sort of moved together. And so the thing was so weird to me as somebody who didn't know the drill about going to church. So those people welcomed me. They didn't do anything wrong, but along the way, I just kept and I folded myself into that. But I always felt like something was a little missing for me. Well, fast forward through lots of time, and I felt like God say to me, I'd gone into ministry. I pastored this small family church, and I felt like God say to me, I want you to create a church for your people, for people who don't go to church, which is the dumbest idea ever. I mean, I was a business major, and if I'd submitted a thesis like that, they would have failed it. That's like creating a hot dog stand for vegetarians. It's just a dumb idea. It just so happened, though, that there was a market for it, that people were spiritually minded. They just weren't inclined to turn to the church to get help with their spiritual questions. Right. And we decided, what if we could create a church like that? Now, this is not a new concept today, but 22 years ago, particularly where in Powhatan, where we started, it was like people thought we were devil worshipers. They thought we were a cult. It was just the strangest thing ever. And
they were like, they don't all stand up and sit down together.
Oh, well, and they don't wear tie. Like, what are you doing not wearing a tie?
Yeah.
And what do you mean you're going to have something other than traditional music and all the things, which, again, is not strange at all today. But back then it was super strange. Yeah. Well, the church went nuts. And we planted the church in a county that had, at the time, like 22,000 people in it. And it went crazy. People just came from all over to be a part of it. People were growing spiritually. People who we hit our target. People who weren't going to church were coming to our church and finding new life and discovering who Jesus was. We knew how to speak their language. I understood them.
Yeah.
And so we just went from there. It just kind of went crazy. And then we built a building, and then we said, what about this multi-site thing, which we've never done anything where we knew what we were doing. Not one time. Every time we've done, it's been like, man, I have no idea what we're going to do or how we're going to pull this off. But we've just sort of followed wherever God led us, and done a bunch of trial and error. We say at our church, everything we do is an experiment. So fast forward all that, I mean, that's kind of how the church came to be. We've never wavered from our mission. Our focus is about reaching people who don't go to church. That's what we do. Mm-hmm. And there are lots of great things that churches can do, and I'm not knocking any of it, but this is what we do. Yeah. And so now our church has 5 campuses. The farthest campuses from point to point are spread over 110 miles or something like that. And those campuses are all growing and thriving. And then we have a campus in 2 prisons, a men's prison and a women's prison.
Wow.
And of course, we're online too, so we reach a lot of people that way too, from all over the country and a few places around the world. And just I just feel blessed to be a part of it. Praise the Lord. God didn't need me, but He said, I think I can use you to do something, and it's just been amazing.
Man, that's so exciting to hear. So what was it, like 2002?
We launched on September the 1st, 2002. This is before Facebook, so there was we had no money. We literally had no money. We were telling people that we were planting a church. They would say, okay, I think I'll come check it out. Where are you going to meet? We were like, I have no idea. I don't know where we're going to meet. And we didn't know these people. So it's not like we could say, hey, I'll call you and tell you. 2 weeks before we launched, we literally didn't know where we were going to meet. So we had 3 weeks. We had no money and virtually no people. And that was the launch plan. Now, and I'm not kidding. That's not preacher embellishment. That's the whole deal. Yeah. And on that first week, there was no marketing because there was no money. On the first week, 148 people came. 189 people came the second Sunday, and then the thing just went nuts.
So that was just word of mouth.
Just word of mouth. Which in a small community.
Where did you meet that first?
We met in an elementary school. Okay. Where we rolled out a tarp on the gymnasium floor and sat in these little kid butt chairs.
Oh,
that weren't.
Kid chairs.
Oh yeah. So you kind of needed 2 for an adult. Today I'd probably need 3, but we won't talk about that. But yeah, it was. And people still came. It was the acoustics were terrible. Our band was awful. Like, I don't know why anybody came back except the movement of the Holy Spirit, which I do think is really sort of our own Gideon experience. I think God knew that I had enough of an ego that if we had grown the church to 150 or 200 people, that I could stick my chest out and say, wow, I'm pretty good. Yeah. And I think God was like, I'm going to create a scenario where there's no way that Hughes can take credit for this. Right. Yes. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That is a really cool place to be.
You got that right.
Where you're shocked at what's happening and you're in charge. And you're
That's
like,
right.
I don't know how this is happening.
That's right.
Yeah.
How many people did you say was at the first Sunday?
148 people came the first Sunday.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty good, though.
That's amazing.
In a small
Yeah.
the secret, I will tell you, this part I do understand. In a small community, rumor and gossip is your friend if you're trying to start a church. Because even all the people that think you're evil,
they just want to
show
come
up.
see this.
Yeah.
Like, well, I'm going to go check it out.
That's right.
Yeah. So when you talk about that kind of explosive growth, and it's just the numbers are high and to the right.
That's right.
Every week.
Right.
This is kind of a leadership question. How did you at that point, how did you try to keep up with it? What worked for you and what didn't work, if you tried anything that didn't work?
Well, we had the perfect combination of a disaster waiting to happen, because what we had was explosive growth and complete and total ignorance and inexperience at the helm. That would be me. So I literally didn't know how to do what was happening. And we had to hire staff. We had to get ahead of, because you could see the growth coming and we wanted to be prepared for it. So in order to get there, we had to spend money we didn't yet have and believe that we could see what God was doing. So, I would go to, we had this leadership team we called the steering team. We still call them the steering team. They're like elders or deacons, but I didn't want to use the title.
I like that name.
Yeah.
That's good.
Elders and deacons the title has baggage. Yeah. Everybody thinks they know what that means. I wanted to do something that no one could label. We invented something new or whatever. So I went to them and I said, we have to invest this money that we don't yet have, but I believe that God is going to, I believe that God is leading us in this direction. And if you will trust me, I think you'll see that we will get a return on the investment. And they did. And here's the thing about leadership. If you play the trust me card, which you can't do all the time, but if you play the trust me card and you're right, people will lean back and they'll be like, how did he know? Like, how did he know? But it earns you credibility. Sure. So you get the ability to do that again if you do it sparingly, and it worked. So how did we do it? We hired the right people, which were interestingly the wrong people for everyone else. I was looking for the people who fit our target, the people that other churches would say, I'll never hire that person. Not, but I was looking for particular skill sets, and mostly I was looking for someone who bought into what we were doing. They would bleed what we were doing. They believed in what we were doing. Yeah, we can train competency. Right. If you've got the character and you believe in the mission, and you're somebody that I can work with as far as my team, that's the person I'm looking for. We can train you how to do whatever. And so it was raw passion and commitment and determination, and we just bled reaching people who didn't go to church. And that's, that was really the secret. It's not some magic formula for us. That was really it.
Man, a couple of things you just said, they're just resonating with me and Men's Alliance. Mm-hmm. The finance thing about trust me and let's move beyond. Mm-hmm. Let's get out ahead of our own budget. Yeah. So I got convicted about this maybe just like 2 or so months ago. Somebody made a really generous donation to Men's Alliance. And I got this check and I thought, oh man, now we can do this and this. And then I was like convicted because I was like, why wasn't I doing that before I got the check? Mm-hmm. If you knew what to do, why did it take this check to make you want to do it? So then I was like, you know what? We need to just go out ahead and start doing this stuff and trust in God that the checks will show up, instead of we're going to sit on our heels and when we get the check, then we'll do big things with it. So that has been a balance for me. Yes. I feel like God is pushing me, saying like, see, Dave, I've got your back. Right. Just move faster. Right. Go. Right. The checks will come in. Right. Don't wait for them. And so hearing you say that you went to your steering team and were like, hey, just trust me. Right. We got to do this. That takes a lot of faith. It does. And that's kind of scary when you're the guy, because you just put your reputation on the table. Well, and so let me tell you where the real risk is. In the early days of something,
the truth is, everything you said sounds like it makes sense, but the truth is, we didn't have anything to lose. Like what would happen if it didn't work? It already wasn't work. Like there was nothing to lose except the dream. But nothing of the dream had become reality at first. Where for me, the risk of not following God into the what appeared to be the risky unknown and getting ahead of the finances and trusting that God would provide. And by the way, if I can just make an aside about that, a lot of people use that kind of language as an excuse to just do what they want. And that is a recipe for failure. We can only go where God is telling us to go, and we've got to be clear about that. And if we're doing that and we're right, then God will provide the resources because, I mean, after all, he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. The whole world is his. So that's not the issue. But if you go where God doesn't want you to go and then sort of try to wrap it into his will, force it, well, then you're going to fail. But anyway, what I was going to say was as we developed a platform and as we started reaching people and as we started developing facilities and then we had something to lose, that's where it actually became harder. Yeah. Because then it was like, man, if we're wrong about this, what if they, and all the what ifs and, I think that's where it got harder. And we went through a season where we just weren't taking risks because I got afraid. And, the Bible speaks clearly about this. God doesn't give us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and self-control. And I had to sort of go through a corrective phase. I think the Spirit of God dealt with me about this and just said, hey, first of all, this doesn't belong to you. So there's that. And second of all, I'm still the one who got you where you are, and I'm still the one leading. And if you'll follow me, the same thing is going to happen. Lives are still going to change, and the church is still going to thrive. But the second you pull back, is actually it's counterintuitive. When you start getting conservative, that's when you start losing. I think organizations are growing or dying. They don't stay the same. They're either growing or dying. And so the second you think, well, we're just going to maintain for a while, you're already going backwards. You just don't know it yet. Yeah.
I've heard that churches, and I heard that this was true of all organizations, is that they generally lose about 10% of their people a year. Yeah. And so you think about that, you have to be growing to maintain.
Just to maintain.
You have to bring in 10% growth a year to stay the same. So yeah, to your point. So now that you do have a lot more to lose, right? Now you've got all these campuses. Is this something you have to fight to stay, kind of, I'll say risky?
Yeah, I would say that's true. And I would say, and what I'm about to say is not derogatory about any person. This is just human nature. The nature of an organization is to institutionalize. Yeah. The larger you get, it's not just you as a leader, because there's a certain tenacity that guys like you and I are just built with. I'm not built to maintain. I always say, look, if my house needs to be painted, I think we should burn it down. We'll build a new one. We'll get a new paint job, and it'll be a lot more fun. Yeah. I'm not built to maintain, but the people, in order to get an organization, once you build something viable, there is naturally going to be a maintenance function to it. And if guys like you and me who are builders don't put people who are maintainers in the organization, the whole thing's on fire all the time. So you've got those people, they're really critical. I need them. I can't live without them. But then there becomes this tension. And the tension is, maybe we just ought to hang out, or let's not move too fast. Yeah. All those voices exist. And what happens is, after a while, they can be tiring. You can get fatigued by it. You can just kind of throw your hands up. And this is a tendency that I have, a temptation is a better way to put it, that I have to just sort of say, I just don't want to fight anymore. Gosh, I just don't want to fight against the institutional movement of the organization, which every organization will have. And that's the voice I have to push back against, is to say, no, we're not going to stay here. We're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep moving forward. On my watch, that's what we're going to do. Now, when it's somebody else's turn, they can do whatever they want. But as far as I'm following the leadership of God, and as far as I can tell, there are still thousands of people around us who don't go to church in areas where we don't have a footprint yet, and we're going to get them. I always say to our folks, we're only interested in every last one of them. That's it. And as long as one of them exists, we're still going to be moving. That's it.
Man, this is such a great topic. We've said this before in Men's Alliance, and I say this to all of our tribe leaders, is the phrase, why don't we just, is about to precede an idea that will kill everything. It's going to make tons of sense. It's going to be practical, and it's going to be efficient, and it's going to kill us.
Right.
If somebody says, why don't we just, and then it's become an insider joke. You know, anytime we catch ourselves and somebody catches me saying,
let's just,
hey guys, why don't we just, you're like, why don't we just?
Right.
Why don't we just meet indoors and not have a fire and not work out and serve coffee?
Right.
That would be way simpler for Men's Alliance, right? And then it's no longer Men's Alliance.
You actually hear that?
No, that was an extreme.
Okay.
What we did
but
here,
that's what it could get to.
What we did here was, why don't we just make the workouts a lot easier,
so everybody can
so that everybody can do them? Because we purposefully make them, like if I'm leading a workout, I make it harder than I can do.
Yeah.
Because I know there's guys, they're more fit than me. So if I make it where I can do it, then I know they're not going to get a good enough workout. So it's like everything we do, make it harder than you can do it.
Yeah.
And then give yourself grace to fall short.
Sure.
But set the bar high. And so I think we've got this whole mentality, and this trickles into everything you could say in an organization is, why don't we just?
Right.
And that's what takes the pressure off, at least for me, to plan a workout. Because I think a lot of guys, I can't lead a workout. I'm fat, not a shape. You know, it's like, well,
You led the hardest workout anybody had ever seen.
Make
2
a
weeks
workout.
ago.
Make a workout that's hard for the fittest guy on your tribe. That's not necessarily that's hard for you. You know.
And then we talk about the same thing true spiritually, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't lower the bar on your devotion
Right.
to something that you could attain,
Right.
so that you feel good about yourself when you leave.
Exactly.
Right? It's like you got to make the devotion harder than we can attain.
That's right.
Same with but I want to talk about God is not risk averse.
Yeah.
Right? So you think about this in our society, I think our culture is pretty risk averse. And the parable of the talents kind of blows my mind. You're like, God called, correct me if I'm wrong here, didn't God call that the guy who got the one talent and buried it? Didn't he call him evil?
He did.
Yeah. And,
Wicked.
Yeah, wicked. And he took his talent and gave it to the guy who had 10 and was putting 10 on the table every time. This guy's not taking his foot off the gas. He's risking it all every time. That's really kind of like back to that financial comparison. That's like way out ahead of the checks.
Yeah.
Really living on faith. And according to that parable from Jesus, that's what God's looking for.
Yeah, it's an interesting. It's an interesting piece that you brought up there. So that's Matthew 25, and no, I haven't memorized the whole Bible. That happens to be a cornerstone parable for me, and I've used it many times in our church. It is a cornerstone parable for leadership, and I'll tell you why. For spiritual leadership, because the point of that parable is not about return. It's about doing the best you can with what you've got.
Right.
So what Jesus is saying is, if you're accountable not for getting something, but for getting everything you can, for maximizing the potential of what I've entrusted to you. And I say this to my folks all the time, and I use that parable, and I say, when we're in a time, when we're in a season of God's favor, where we really sense God's favor, a new movement, more people, more responsibility, because Jesus' point is, when you've been trusted with little, when you've been faithful with little, you will be entrusted with more. Mm-hmm. So what I say is, what we're experiencing now is the fact that we've been faithful, and God is trusting us with more. And if we continue to be faithful, we will get greater footprint, influence, and responsibility. And if we are not, even what we have will be taken from us. That's Matthew 25.
Yeah.
So interestingly, your phrase, why don't we just? Mm-hmm. What that is incremental responsibility. So what it is to say, oh, we're going to get a return, but it'll be a safe return. We will grow. It'll be more, but it'll be a safe more. the parable in Matthew 25 is not about save more. It's not about incremental return. It is about maximizing your potential, which is what we are responsible to do. Jesus did not criticize the one who had 5 and doubled it versus the one who had 10. And he didn't compare those two.
Right.
They maximized with what they were given. That's my job. It's your job.
Yeah.
And we are responsible for that, and we will be held accountable for that.
And, I think so many, kind of like the thought that comes to my mind is like the older traditional safe churches that are very, fiscally conservative,
Yes.
And, outreach conservative. They are viewing themselves, because I've been in a lot of them, they're viewing themselves as being good stewards. Right? There's this notion that to be conservative and safe is to be the good steward.
Right.
We don't want to be risky. But yeah, read Matthew 25. It's the opposite.
It's yes.
The good steward is the one who puts every chip in the middle of the table.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like behaving as if the creator of the universe has your back.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well,
Because he does.
and that you're following him. That's the key.
Yeah.
Because God just doesn't bless whatever we want to do,
Right.
as long as we're following him. And if you think about what Jesus exemplified, you said earlier, God is God of risk or whatever. Everything Jesus did, not only did he risk, but he's calling his followers to risk. He says to Peter, well, you come on out in the water. That's risky. He says to his followers, you go heal people. Well, that's risky. He says, grab the fish out of the water and there'll be a coin inside. Or throw your nets out of the boat after they haven't caught anything all day long. Jesus exemplified and called his people to risk, but risk in following him.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't think God calls us to play it safe. I don't think he calls us to do things that play it safe.
There's so many examples, in the Bible of doing what God says and not knowing what the outcome's going to be.
That's right.
And just trusting him. I think God doesn't give us peace on a lot of things until we leap,
Yeah.
And then once we leap, then God, because then we wouldn't have faith,
Right.
know. So if you move, that's what moving on faith is. And it kind of, you can dial this all back to, that's how our spiritual walk is. I like the phrase, only dead fish go with the flow. If you're not walking, if you're not constantly walking upstream with your spiritual walk, you're just naturally going to drift.
Yeah.
And that's how it is with any kind of organization.
I
If
think
you're
that's
not
true.
constantly moving forward, you're naturally just going to move backward. Like
That's right.
we were saying, there's no staying in the same spot. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of organizations want to do that. And you talked earlier about churches, and I love the church. I think that I often say it'll take all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people. So we don't. I tell our folks, look, I'd like to think we have a great church, but we're not the only great church.
Right.
And yet I do think that God calls the church to be on the move. We were supposed to be a movement. We were never supposed to be about brick and mortar.
Yeah.
I say to our people, I don't know that they always believe this, or they nod their heads, but I'm not sure they buy it. I say, we're never going to build a building that we're not willing to tear down when it's done with its usefulness.
Yeah.
But our natural tendency, right, is to sort of worship and glorify facilities and brick and mortar and all that stuff. But God, I don't care about any of that stuff. These are. I always say to our folks, we're not building a museum. I want these buildings to get used all the time, and I want somebody to break a window every now and then. I want to play in them. I want kids to love being there. I want teenagers to love being there. I want them to get used. So when we walk around our buildings and the paint's scuffed up all over the place, nobody needs to gripe about that. Nobody should gripe about that. What it means is that life is happening here.
Used.
It's being used.
Yeah.
We're being a blessing to the community because communities outfits and other organizations are using it, and our folks are growing, and they love being here. They're here growing spiritually. So that's what it's all about. It's not about protecting the building.
I love how you said, talking about, it's not just about being risky. It's about being risky when you're doing what God has you doing. So that means kind of like, if you think about this, if you ever find yourself wanting to throttle back and not be on the move forward, I think the question to ask yourself, both personally in your life, in your family, or in your organization, if you're a leader, is ask yourself, do we not believe that we're doing what God has called us to do?
Right.
oh, if the answer is yes, well, then that should drive the obvious,
Of course.
fiscal choice to move forward. But to those organizations that are very stagnant and, trying to be very safe and very good stewards and not be risky, I think they need to ask themselves, do we think we're doing what God wants us to do?
Right. And sometimes their answer would be yes.
Yeah.
But I think you're asking the right question. It's incumbent upon every leader to lead the organization to ask the question, are we doing what God wants us to do? That really is the only question that matters.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this earlier. If you are moving, taking risks without being in the center of the will of God, we call that gambling.
Right.
When you're taking risks and you are following God sort of lockstep, that's a sure bet. That's a sure thing. Like, that's no gamble in that
good.
at all.
Yeah.
I need to stop using my poker analogy.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm fine. I think it's great.
What's your What is your checklist for knowing and trusting this is what God wants me to do, and it's not just me wanting to do it and confusing it with
the Mexican
with God.
food you had last night.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. So how do you balance that? Like, this is God, but really it's just your own ambition.
Yep.
You know.
Well, I'm glad you asked. In a long time ago, how I sense the voice of God moving into ministry is something that I have utilized ever since then. This was the late 90s, and I was taking a course called Experiencing God, Knowing and Doing the Will of God, which was written by Henry Blackaby, who's dead now. And in there, he says he lays out this sort of formulaic approach. He would be very upset to call it a formula. He says it's not. This is about relationship with God, but this is how you know. And this has proven extremely accurate and helpful for me for my entire life. There are 4 ways God primarily speaks: through the Bible, prayer, circumstances, and the church. You cannot use any one of these by itself. I mean, we all know you can make the Bible say whatever you want it to say. And circumstances, I mean, I had a guy one time say he was in terrible financial shape. I pull up in his driveway one day, he's got a brand new lawnmower. I said, how'd you get the brand new lawnmower? He said, well, God, I told God, if you approve the loan, if you allow the loan to get approved, it must be your will that you want me to buy it. I thought, you're just too dumb to talk to. I mean, I just got in the car and left. Right. Anyway, so your circumstances, you can make them say anything. Obviously in prayer, I can, the sense I get in prayer could be the food I had last night or whatever. But what Blackaby teaches is that there's a process to understand that God will speak through the Holy Spirit and line up these things, usually at least 2, sometimes 3, sometimes all 4. The church being a critical component, not being the whole body of the church, but that group of people, we would call this a small group, or it might be a tribe, where you say to them, and I've done this many times in critical decisions, I'll get that group of people together who I really trust, who are on the journey towards Jesus together with me. They're not just friends. They're friends who are together. We're looking for Jesus to guide our lives. And I'll say, I'm sensing God moving me in this direction, or I'm sensing God leading me to lead our church in this direction, or to make this critical life change. And I would like to know if you'd be willing to pray about this and then confirm or not confirm. Confirm or not confirm. They have to have the ability to say, we've all prayed about this. We don't think God's saying this to you. Now, at the end of the day, to your question, I still get to decide. They're not taking the decision away from me. But if this group that I trust, and I've gone through this process and I show them, I've sensed this in the Bible. This is where I came to in the Bible. In prayer, I've sensed God saying this to me, or in my circumstance, or all 3. And now I'm asking you to confirm, and I trust you. And they all go for days or weeks and they pray and they come back and they say, we really don't sense God saying this. Then I really ought to pay attention to that. I've never not paid attention to that. And I have had that happen, by the way. And I'll go back and say, okay, God, where did I miss this? That approach has been flawless for me when it comes to making a big decision.
Were they ever right?
They're almost all. I can't think of a time when they were wrong.
Really? So you've reassessed and been like, I'm going to listen to your
absolutely,
and it's steered you, and it was the right thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They have to be They have to be people
The right
that you
people.
believe.
You surrounded yourself before this moment
Yes.
with godly men
Yes.
who are on the same course as you. And this is actually another really good example of isolation being terminal.
Oh, it's terminal.
If you don't have this, then you're fighting with your right arm behind your back. Now you've got to make these decisions just based on what you think God told you about a lawnmower loan.
That's right.
And because that guy's probably isolated, he's probably not bouncing that idea off of a tribe.
Yeah.
Or he has bounced it. Here's the flaw that I see happen frequently is someone will hear about this and they'll take me up on the advice or hear about it from somewhere else, and they'll get a group of people together and they'll say, would you pray about this? They'll do all the steps. They come back and say, we don't think this is where the Spirit of God is leading you. And then they're no longer friends. We just push them away. We create our own isolation.
Yeah.
Because we only want them to tell us what we want to hear. And I always say, real friends tell friends the truth. Yeah. Real friends tell your friend the truth. And I don't want people around me just nodding their head at what I want to hear. Mm-hmm. The whole world's willing to do that. I need people to tell me the truth about me.
Right.
Now, they've got to be people I trust. Not everybody gets to walk up and, I always say to people, I always say to my closest friends, I want you to tell me the truth about me. Now, don't say that you're short, bald, and ugly, because I already know that.
Yeah.
But tell me the truth about me, and I trust you.
Yeah. That's one of our core values in Men's Alliance is feedback. And Sunshine has said, a friend who lets you believe your own lies is no friend at all.
There's no friend. Yeah. There's no friend.
That's one of our core values for sure in MA. I got a leadership question I'm just dying to ask you. To what extent should a good leader, in your opinion, delegate things versus do themselves?
All right.
Talk to us about that balance.
When you're the leader, one of the critical roles that you cannot delegate is the culture. You are the guardian and definer of the culture. You. No one else can do that for Men's Alliance but you. Not only are you, and so what that means is not only do you create the culture, but then you have to fight to keep that culture. It's not evil, but people, particularly in an organization like Men's Alliance, is spread out all over the place. It's hard to keep your hand wrapped around what you want the culture to be. So any leader, and particularly a founding leader, and I'm one of those too, has to say, what are the things that I'm willing to flex on, and what are the things that these are immovable. Like I'm not willing. This has to be the case. And so when I surround myself with people who are bought into what we do, and I know that they believe in what we do, and I have defined our culture, then I can delegate just about anything. And I know that they will be what we call vision carriers. I didn't invent that language. I'm not that smart, but they're vision carriers. And you need some people like that. And then you have to check in. But I don't think there's anything in my organization that I can't delegate except for the definition of the culture of what we're trying to create. I think that's one thing I have to hold with me, because once you do that, everything else flows out of that. Everything flows out of how the culture that you've created.
Yeah.
And I worked really hard over a long period of time, and some naive mistakes of my own that were just part of my immaturity and all of that, to finally get to the place in the last, 5 years or so, where I've got a team around me. I have a senior staff team. We call them the Strategic Leadership Team, the SLT. And they are my right hand. We lead the church together. For a long time, I felt like I was leading alone. And there were people on our staff who loved me and loved our church and all that stuff. But no, I felt like nobody. I carried the burden. I was the one that went to sleep. I was the one that woke up at night wondering if we were going to make payroll. I was the one that worried about all the things, and everybody else. I felt like everybody else was just like, I clocked out. I did my job. It's good. But over time, I built this team, and I've got such the right people around me, and we literally carry the burden together. And I'm telling you, when you get to that, it takes a long time. But when you get to that place, it's the sweet spot, because I feel like they own it with me as much as me.
Yeah. Hey guys, are you looking to lose a few pounds, tone up your muscles, get in better shape physically? Well, let me tell you about our guy, Nick Hawkins, call sign Coach from Bravo Tribe. He's the owner of Hawkins Health and Fitness, and they have a patented once and for all fat loss protocol. They can help you lose the fat, tone up the muscle without the crazy restrictive diets or intense cardio sessions or tedious calorie tracking. Okay, check out Nick Hawkins, call sign Coach at Hawkins Health and Fitness. I'm going to give you his number. Get ready to jot this down, 804-638-1386. Check out Coach, Hawkins Health and Fitness. He'll help get you in shape. I feel like you made a really huge statement that I fear went unnoticed.
Okay.
You will delegate everything except for the culture.
Except
for that main
except for
thing.
the culture.
What's that mean, the culture? Like, specifically, what do you mean
Okay.
by that?
For example, why are the three things that you do, the workout, the devotional, and the fire, why are those the things?
Yeah, very strategic reasons,
Okay.
right? And they've got to be done in a certain order.
Why is that?
So the fire has to be built first so that when people arrive, they feel welcomed. They feel like they're showing up at something, right? It's already there. And you get out of your car with a different vibe when you see a roaring fire than if you pull up and you get out of your car and you see somebody struggling to build something, right? So, and then you've got to do the workout first because that's how men bond. That's the icebreaker. Nobody's going to share real world struggles around the greatest fire in the world if they just got out of their car and walked up there. We have to first bond through a physical struggle together. So you got to have the fire, the workout, the devotion.
Why the devotion? Why do we do a devotion?
Draws us closer to each other and closer to Christ.
That would be the answer to your question. That's culture.
Yeah.
And then, of course, culture is also, there are organizational cultural things that you build. Like we have some statements that we make that we talk about a lot. They're not just dusty on a wall or a shelf about how we're going to treat each other. So we say things like, we have this phrase, we learned it somewhere called one of our values is we'll be authentic in all relationships. And under there are some sort of criteria. One of those is what we call the last 10%. We have lots of last 10% conversations. So the first 90% is easy to say. So we'll say, hey, Dave, your hair looks nice, man. I love that shirt, and what a great podcast you did last week. I listened to it. It was awesome and all that. That's all easy to say. It's the last 10% that's hard to say. So say, hey, man, when we were in that conversation with that group of people and you made that joke, it really hurt my feelings. I just need to get that off my chest. We all withhold those things. They're just hard to do.
I like that concept, the last
10%. Well, let me tell you what it does. This is just an example of culture. Yeah. Let me tell you what it does. This happens with me a lot. Someone will call me up or they'll usually call me or whatever, and they'll say, hey, man, can you carve out like half an hour? I need to have a last 10% conversation with you. I have a tendency to be defensive. I'm probably not the only one. If you just get in my face about something, I probably am going to be okay, but there's at least a chance I'm going to misbehave. And I don't mean like cuss at you or anything. I mean like get defensive and try to justify whatever. If you called me up tomorrow and said, hey man, can I have a last 10% conversation with you about that podcast we did yesterday and something you said? That helps me. It makes me take a deep breath and say, okay, you don't have to be defensive. You're going to listen to him. This guy loves you. He's your friend. And I do all that. I can do all that in a split second just because you say those words. And I do that with other people. And people are like, okay, cool. Yeah, sure.
And that's the guy that you said 10 minutes ago that you want around you.
That's the guy I want around me.
So it's like, it's hard. Like, that's easy to say. Like, I don't want yes men, be surrounded by yes men. But when you're not, it's easy to forget. Yeah. And they tell you something you don't like. You're like, this mother.
That's right.
It's like,
I thought you said you didn't want to be surrounded by yes men.
It's like, I thought you said you didn't want a yes man. Okay. So it's like, it's hard. It's like, be careful what you ask for because it's not fun.
It's not.
And you have to remember that, like, this is what I need.
But I will say, if you build that into your culture, and this is just an example, I'm really not, I'm not trying to, sort of prescribe it, but this is a cultural issue. I wanted a culture that I do not wear masks well. I just want to be, what you see is what you get. I'm this guy at home. I'm this guy with my team. I don't know how someone lives a duplicitous life and I don't want to look over my shoulder. I don't want people in my organization living like that either. It doesn't mean it never happens.
Yeah.
But the culture that I wanted to build was one of authenticity. What you see is what you get. We can tell you what's on our mind. It's going to be okay. So we build that last 10% language. We build language. We use this phrase, do you have any withholds? A withhold is anything you need to say or I need to hear. So it sort of invites the last 10%.
Yeah.
We end a lot of our meetings saying, does anybody have any withholds? And we look at every person. Like, you got to answer the question. And you can't lie. Mm-hmm. So what that does is it prevents, this is helpful to any leadership team, it prevents people from leaving the meeting and then getting in the hallway and whispering and thinking, I can't believe Goose did that. Like, that's the dumbest decision ever. No. If you think it's the dumbest, you better say it right here. And I just want to give you one last chance to say it. No repercussions for this. Does anybody have any withholds before we move on?
Yeah.
And it just helps. And many times I've had somebody say, Actually, I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
it's
fantastic.
It's hard to be that first person because I've seen it. I'm sure we've all seen it where you get asked that question, and the 10 people ahead of you said no, and you're like, well, I'm not going to be the one to say anything, And then after you leave, it's like, were you thinking the same thing I was thinking? Yeah, I was thinking it too. It's like, it's like.
But it's
so
on
that's
you
hard.
To say
I know
it.
it is on you to say it.
In our organization,
right.
That's a foul. That is a major foul.
Right.
Do you know how many times, and we've got enough of these stories that people know them. You know how many times that scenario has happened where everybody around the table, and then the last person says, actually, I do, and it changes everything.
Everything comes out.
Everything. If we're going to put this in spiritual terms, if it's my team and I'm counting on the team to speak the voice of God, I'm not Moses. I don't want to go up on the hill and hear. Mm-hmm. I want the team to do this together to the extent that we can. When that last person speaks, oftentimes it is the voice of God speaking through that person and altering our course together.
It's the same thing that happened. That kind of same environment happens around the fire when you ask, is there anything somebody's struggling with?
Yes.
Like, who's struggling with porn?
Yes.
And it'll be quiet for like 10 minutes. And not me. And then it takes one person with courage to say, yeah, I am. And then it starts, he said, it opens it up. So it's almost like, I wonder if it would be shady to be like, when I go around, you need to bring something up before the meeting. You need to bring something up, and then it'll get people talking,
Well, I have to say to that point, the tribe we have a tribe at 2 of our campuses.
Yeah.
And I've been to both of them once. And I have marveled at the level of transparency and vulnerability that those guys were willing to put on the table around the fire. It's been what you have built, what you are building is life-changing and life-giving to these guys who have nowhere else that they can go and feel like I can actually talk like this.
Man, that is so great to hear. I love hearing that. That means the DNA is the same.
That's right.
And I haven't been to your tribes, the tribes at your church. I haven't been there. But hearing that, I know the leaders there and they've got my vision.
Yeah.
And they're making it happen. So I want to just go back real quick to the delegating thing. Can you give an example of maybe something you've delegated big that would surprise people to hear?
Sure.
Oh man, he delegated that.
Okay.
What's an example?
Yeah.
Okay. So I am, hang on, I got to do the math. I turned 53 this year.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. That was a long time ago. And when we planted our church, we planted in 2002, so I was 31. And so relatively speaking, I was young then and I'm not now. About 5 years ago, I started to realize, there's this whole sort of portfolio of churches that were founded with some young guy who had a lot of energy. He was a little dumb, but he was passionate about Jesus, and it would shot up and to the right until a certain moment when it started to plateau. Then the church got older every year. The senior pastor got older, and he rode the wave all the way until he was 80 or whatever. So there were two things I did that I made conscious decisions about it. One of them was I said, I don't want to be the guy that everyone is whispering about and saying, man, he's a legend. He just should have gone 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And the second thing that I didn't want to do was be the guy that held all of the platform for himself. This is not my church. It's not about me. I'm determined I'm not, to the extent that I can control it, it's not going to be about me. And I have to be willing to invite younger talent to the table and give them real authority, like really delegate, really give them the power. So a few years ago, I started building a teaching team. I think it's okay to say you're good at something. I'm a good communicator. I'm still learning. There's still things I'm learning, but I'm really good at what I do. If you only do one thing well, and I only do words well, if you only do one thing well, you better maximize it, because otherwise you don't have anything left.
Yeah.
I do words really well, and I'm a good communicator. That's what I was born to do, and I'd be totally glad to preach 50 Sundays a year, but that would hurt the church. So what I decided to do was create a teaching team made up of varying demographics and ages, and give away my platform. The platform that I built that no one would argue about if I stayed on it 50 Sundays a year. But long term, this hurts the church, and it doesn't invite. It doesn't think of where's the church going to be when Brian's gone. Because otherwise, if Brian gets hit by a bus, and by the way, it better be a bus. I don't. They're like, if it's a Prius, I need you to lie about it. It needs to be. It would be so embarrassing. It's got to be a bus, or a big Mack truck. That's it. That's it. Yeah. And then you need to say, he almost made it.
Yeah,
he was hit square on, but he almost made it. You should see the truck.
You should see the truck is crazy.
So anyway, if I was, if you keep it all to yourself, then you get hit by a truck, the church just falls apart. What I want is to create a scenario where if I got killed on the way home today, I'm hoping a couple thousand people come up and cry their eyes out, and next week the church is bigger.
Yeah.
You can only do that if you don't make it about you. So anyway, I delegated, I created this teaching team. I managed for a long time, I managed the teaching team. I gave them specific assignments, specific dates, what they were going to talk about. We would do message review. We have this whole review process that's still in place. And I started to give them platform time. And then about a year ago, I invited my number 2 teaching pastor, who's a woman, by the way, and incredibly gifted, and has been with me. I hired her when she was basically a kid a long, long time ago. I joke with her now. I say, you're not a kid, you're old now, but she, So anyway, and so Angie manages that team now. And I just said, I delegated that. Now I'm still involved with it, but more and more, she's managing the teaching team. And I want it that way. I started giving her series preparation. I used to go away and I would design all the series for the whole church year. And now I'm giving her series design and saying, oh, here's the summer. I want you to figure out what we're going to talk about in the summer. And she's really good at it. She's not only a good communicator, she's a good leader, she's a good coach. And others on the team are taking more responsibility too. And in that way, I have to tell you, I could write a book about mistakes I've made. But one of the things I feel really good about what I've done is to give away authority that I could have hoarded. And I frankly think that hoarding that kind of authority is malpractice. And it makes it about me and my ego, and that can never be. This was never the church. This wasn't the church of Brian Hughes. It's the church of Jesus Christ, and we have to act like it. Yeah. And that means we have to lead it as if we are a steward of it. Right. Someone else will sit in my seat one day, and that's good.
Mm-hmm. You have to love the mission more than you love being involved in the mission.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. One day somebody's going to forget my name.
Right.
As long as we have elevated the name of Jesus, we win. We win. That's all I really care about.
Do you notice that the more you delegate, do you think it makes you better at the one thing that you are doing?
I do. And I think it shifts the one thing that you're doing. So over time, you realize, John Maxwell puts it like this. He says, if you just keep learning and you just keep leading, and you keep learning and you keep leading, and you keep learning and you keep leading, one day you'll wake up and you'll realize, I'm just leading. I'm not even thinking about it anymore. It's like driving a car. You just get in the car and drive. For a long time, I had to think about the mechanics of leading. And then you get to the place where you realize, I think I just kind of know how to do this now. Not that I know everything, but like I'm leading intuitively now. And when you give away the other stuff, you can lead at a different level, and the whole organization is better because they can take advantage of your experience and your wisdom and the credentials that you built over time. And everybody wins like that. But you never get there if you're hanging on to all the day-to-day operational stuff. I think it's so critical that you delegate. But I will say this, there's a difference between delegation and abdication.
Right.
And I've done a whole lot of the latter. If you give away stuff but you don't check in, then you're going to find your organization will be a totally different thing than you ever had in mind. And at some point, and I will say, I think I've experienced this a time or two, it gets away from you so much you can't get it back, or it's really hard to get it back.
So you're saying after you delegate, it's crucial that you still check in.
You got to check in.
You got to keep checking in, or else it drifts, and now you've abdicated.
Yeah, you want that, and they want that. The people you've delegated to, they want that too. They want to know that they're doing the right thing. I have a friend who we have a particular, every multi-site church has a multi-site model that they at first follow, and then they kind of tweak and invent. It becomes their own thing. I have a good friend who had a multi-site church, and we do live video teaching. So it's not pre-recorded; it's live at all of our campuses. This guy developed a multi-site model that had live teaching pastors at every campus. They were all live teaching pastors. And he and I have debriefed about this many times. He didn't check in enough and didn't do enough control of culture, which I don't like the word control, but you know what I mean. He didn't wrap his hand around the culture enough. He got too loose with it. And he had a huge campus go rogue on him because the teaching pastor on the platform has the microphone.
Yeah.
And if you are not in sync with the teaching and it's a fine model, but it's super risky in that way. And like half the church left. It was a church, and it was a huge church, thousands and thousands of people. It was a big church split, and it was super ugly. And it took him a while just to emotionally recover from that. And he realized this was a real problem. By the way, this is why I decided when we started going multi-site that we weren't going to do that model. There were two reasons. One was that, but the other was that the pastoring skill and the communicator skill are two different things. Most churches, single staff churches, the pastor has to do it all. Like they have to be good pastorally. They have to have some counseling skill. They got to have some teaching pastor communicator skill. They got to be good with a budget, and nobody is good at all those things, by the way. But when a church like ours, we can say we need great communicators to be teaching pastors, and then campus pastors to be great pastors. And sometimes they're the same, and sometimes they're not, and that's okay. So instead of paying somebody instead of paying 5 different people to develop 5 different messages and all the time and energy that takes every week, this is in business we'd call this marginal. We would call this economies of scale. Yeah. So we're allowed to invest in one person who's doing it every week, that then communicates across all the campuses instead of the inefficiency of 5 times. And we eliminate the risk of having a campus sort of get sideways.
That makes a lot of sense. And I've never thought about this because I'm not a pastor.
Right.
But it makes sense also that if they're all hearing the same message, that it would be kind of a uniting thing, right? People from one campus and people from another campus, they now can all talk about the Sunday message, whereas otherwise they all had a different Sunday message and much more of a different total church experience.
That's right.
Right.
And we get the same message, not just in adults, but the kids get the same message. We have campuses now where the mom goes to one of our campuses, one daughter goes to another campus, and one daughter goes to another campus. And they all get to talk every Sunday about the experience they had. It's all the same.
Yeah,
the music's the same. They get the live band, of course, so it's a little bit different flavor maybe, depending on who's on the platform at their campus. But the message is the same. Kids get the same message. Hey, can I do a last 10%? Do I get to do that?
Let's do it.
Oh, snap. This is going to be good.
He's excited.
Get your popcorn, everybody.
Yes, you are a pastor. Every one of those leaders, when I show up at Men's Alliance, those guys talk about you. They talk about your message. They're teaching your material. They're wearing your T-shirt. And I don't have an ounce of jealousy about that. Praise the Lord. You're their pastor. You are a pastor. Okay, last 10%'s over.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I received
Yeah.
that.
That's good.
I'm going to sit here and think for a minute.
Yeah, you think. You think while I ask this question. So when you say you know, delegate everything, are you delegating everything for that thing you delegated, or just the grunt work of it?
Well, if you only delegate the grunt work of it, all you're going to get are people who are gophers.
Yeah.
No. I want to delegate leadership.
Right.
I want to teach leadership. I want to coach. So in my organization, coachability is a deal killer. If you're not coachable, you're
right.
not on our team.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
so as long as you're coachable and i.e. from me, as long as you let me coach you, I will delegate to you real authority, not just the grunt work. No, who wants to be that guy?
Yeah. So you're not delegating like, okay, pick the songs that you want us to sing on Sunday, but then run them by me first.
Oh, no,
and I'll give the final say.
This is what happens now.
Yeah.
I did. We were doing this campus launch, and I got all these people fired up in the room, and it went in a different way than I thought it was going to go. We had kind of a plan, and everybody in the room got so excited. So I walked down from the platform. This has been a few years ago. I walked down from the platform, and I was like, "Man, this is so great. Let's just put together a plan right now."
Yeah.
And so I said, "Okay." So I start organizing it, and my team. So I cast great vision. Like I'm good at that. And I pointed to the hill, and people were excited about charging the hill. We're going to change people's lives, and let's go get them. And then I stepped down and I started getting into sort of tactical mode. My team walked in the room in front of the crowd and looked at me and said, "We've got this. You can leave now."
Oh, snap.
To me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I would have made a mess, and they know it. That's not my gift. They essentially uninvited me from my own meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they say this to me a lot. They're like, "Hey man, if you'll just tell us where we're going,
Yeah.
we will take us there." So in that way, I am giving away all of it. No one runs the music by me. No one runs the tactical piece by me. If we're doing a cultural issue, i.e. a policy decision, I'm involved in that. As a teaching pastor on my week when I'm preaching, I am involved in what we call the package. That's the thing that comes just before the message and the thing that comes after the message, whether it's a song or a video element or whatever. I'm involved in that because that's woven into what I'm saying. It's a part of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
The rest of what happens in that service, they're not even asking me, because we have built a culture where we know what that's supposed to feel like. We know what we're trying to communicate. Everybody's on the same page about it.
Yeah.
And that goes for, I mean, really seriously, I am the most ignorant person in my church. People will come up to me, they'll say, "Hey, when are we doing the so-and-so, or when's this event?" I'm like, "Man, I'm not kidding when I tell you, I am the dumbest guy here. You got to go see somebody else, anybody else. I don't know about that stuff." And they're better at it than me. So I've given them all that, and they know that they don't even need to ask my permission.
When you think about it, it would be impossible for him to do it any other way, given how many campuses. Were you at five or six?
They're five, and then the two prison campuses and
Five
online.
and two prison
Yeah.
and online. You couldn't have that level of control. I think it's probably accurate to say you can have a high level of control at a small organization.
Sure.
Or you can choose to have a large organization if you are comfortable releasing your grip on the control.
That's right.
Like you can't have large and tight control.
Yeah, that's
You'll
right.
burn yourself out.
That's right. Yeah. So the secret to it is you build a team
Right.
that you delegate real authority to, and you're in lockstep together, and then you just know that they know how to do it.
Has there ever been a decision made and you know, and you see it after it's been made and you're like, "Well, I wouldn't have done it that way, but
Oh
I
yeah.
trust, you
Oh
know,
yeah. I know. I mean,
delegated it, so
yeah. That's
that's how it goes."
It's so kind. I know what's more likely happened
Yeah.
is, of course this happens, and
Yeah.
where some decisions made, and somebody's saying, "Hey, we're doing something." I'm like, "What?" Like, "Yeah, we're doing something." Like, have we lost our minds?
Yeah.
Who decided that?
Yeah.
And sure, and that does occasionally happen. And I'll bring somebody in. I'll be like, "Man, what made you think that this was okay.
Yeah.
And-
Well, that do you correct that, or do you
Yes.
just say,
Oh, yeah, that's
do you
where
let it
you're
go? You're like, well, I gave
checking
it to him,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, we had this
that was his decision to make.
we had this event one time, and it was some kid thing. I can't remember exactly what it was. And all the plan. Oh, first of all, I'm an extrovert, so I think the more the merrier. And I also am sort of a spontaneous guy. I know we have to do planning and stuff. Sort of a necessary evil. My wife would say, "You can't call it evil like this."
Yeah.
Anyway, so we had this children's thing, whatever it was. I can't remember what it was. And all the planner types, wanted to like do tickets for it. And so they could know how many people were coming and all the things. And in advance, they were like, so we're going to create this cutoff date. And then we had people showed up for the event that got turned away. And we had capacity. They just didn't sign up early enough.
Oh no.
And I was like, what? Like what?
No,
What?
we're not turning people away.
No, we're not turning people away. The culture we're creating is welcoming and inviting. I'm all for, like, to the best of our ability, we need to know. I get that. Like, you got to know how much food to have, and you got to know how this, and you got to know that. But we're not turning people away. I'll tell you a case in point.
That's hilarious. That's where you step in.
Yeah,
You're like, okay, guys, hold on.
Yeah, and you understand, it wasn't the decision; it was the culture. The culture I wanted to create is inviting and welcoming.
Yeah.
And it was countercultural.
Right.
And that does happen. And there's no way it doesn't happen in an organization where you've given away authority. Because it's exactly like you said. If you want to absolutely control everything, it won't scale. Fine. You'll be a small organization forever, and if that's good for you, then whatever. I wanted to maximize our impact, back to Matthew 25, and to do that, I had to give away real authority. And there are going to be some times when you say, yeah, this isn't what I want. This isn't what I had in mind. We're going to have to make this tweak. Case in point, by the way, you're speaking at our men's huddle in February, end of February 28th. And all of our guys are super excited about this.
I can't wait.
And everybody's planning, right? So the food guys are like, "Hey man, I need to know how many guys are coming." Yeah. Like, well, first of all, it's September. Like, how could I possibly know how many guys are coming? Right. And so we kind of developed a date. Like, on this date, we're going to know. But even as long as there are still chairs available, somebody can still walk in. And if I got to go down the road and pick up some pizzas, that's what we're going to do, because that's the culture I'm trying to create. So sure, that happens.
This is such a huge topic right now in Men's Alliance, right? So I've got to be willing to let a guy in South Dakota or Oregon who's never been to Men's Alliance start a tribe, which is a little scary. And we give them the leadership guide, you get a written playbook, and you get 10 how-to videos so you can actually see it and hear it, right? So you can read it, you can see it, you can hear it. That's the best we can do.
Yeah.
But then once you've read it, seen it, heard it, had our video calls, now they're doing a test. They have the guys answer some questions and then have another follow-up call. I'm like, well, you kind of got this one wrong. So, but at a certain point, they're launching, and you have to hope as the leader, they're probably getting it 90% right.
Sure.
They're probably getting it 90% right. But, that's like a control thing. Like, I've totally 100% out of my. So one of the things that is a big challenge in Men's Alliance is we need tons of great leaders.
That's right.
We are absolutely in the people business. We are in the leadership business. So every single tribe, it needs an amazing leader to be the tribe leader. And then it needs stellar leaders to be the workout chief, the devotion chief, the fire chief, all these things that make a tribe awesome. Every tribe needs all those things. So you're like, man, we need a couple thousand great leaders. So you, with all these campuses, you can't do all this without a ton of great leaders. So I guess the question for you is, how did you find all your great leaders? Did God just bring them to you? How did you get these great leaders?
I would say the biggest way we developed leaders and develop leaders today is we didn't find them, we created them. Now that sounds a little like a God complex. I don't mean like we actually created them,
created.
but we took
We
people.
formed them out of the dust.
We formed them out of the dust. We breathed life into them. We took our own. I'm a big fan of they're standing right in front of you already. What you have to do is cultivate the leadership that's already inside of them.
I like that.
I'd rather have that, and I'll tell you why I like that better, because they already know you. They're already one of you. You don't have to teach them the culture. They already got your culture. All you have to do is then teach them the leadership part of it, which is just a skill you can learn. I mean, Maxwell talks about the law of the lid, and he's right. And there's a certain leadership capacity each leader has, and you probably can't overcome that. But as long as they have some gift of leadership, you can train them in the skills of leadership. Culture is the hard part, and it's the part that I'm trying to ensure, and it's the hardest part to get right when you go outside. So I'd much rather go inside. We developed years ago. I realized I sent a person on my team that we had a campus pastor quit, and I sent a person on my team to go out there and fill in the gap. I said, I need you to go out there for 1 year. And I realized that when I sent this person out there, that I had no one else in the pipeline. Like if I had any other leader quit or die, I was in trouble.
Yeah.
So I developed this cool training program. I called it Turbo Leadership Group. And I handpicked 8 people, and I said, I see in you great leadership. I'm asking you to come and go through a 1-year program with me. We will meet once a month. I will give you some books to read. We will have some homework to do in between our monthly meetings. And I'm going to train you in what you need for pastoral leadership over the course of 12 months. That's why we called it Turbo Leadership. We're not sending you to seminary for 3 years. You're going to do this.
You met once a month?
Once a month for 12 months.
Okay.
And there was one extra meeting in there. And I developed a curriculum. And so there was a Bible crash course. There was basic pastoral care, how to communicate in front of a group of people, which is not how to preach a sermon. It's like how to host and how to lead a team, how to make an ask, which you have to use good diction, by the way, if you say that. How to make an ask.
Big ask.
A big ask, but not of yourself. Anyway, so basics of like visiting someone in a crisis care setting and some counseling stuff, and how to lead a team, how to grow a team, how to lead a team meeting, how to cast vision, all of the skills that you need, which doesn't make them an expert. It's sort of a survey course. And here's what happened. Out of that Turbo Leadership Group, there was always one or two sort of shining stars. Mm-hmm. Then there was a middle layer who were just solid. And then there's always a couple people that it just wasn't going to work. And we started hiring staff out of that group. And some of our highest level leaders and most effective leaders were identified in the Turbo Leadership Group. To be in the Turbo Leadership Group, you had to at least have the possible sense that God might be calling you into ministry of some kind. Not a slam dunk, I'm sure of it, but maybe God's calling. So there's this one guy who's a key part of our team. His name is Brian Pope. He was a campus pastor. He's on my SLT, the Senior Strategic Leadership Team, and he's what we call our do-good pastor today. So he leads all of our mission efforts locally and internationally. And Brian was a corporate executive at Target on like headed toward the C-suite kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I sat down with him and I was like, hey man, you sense the call to ministry. I sense a call to ministry in you, and I don't have a whole lot of money to offer you. So he left all kinds of 6 figures on the table, quit his corporate job, became a pastor. We ordained him, trained him, blah, blah, blah. And he is a shining star. Another guy, our executive pastor, we call him the director of operations, is a guy named Lenny Harris. Lenny was at Altria, a director, making lots of money, on the fast track to the C-suite. And I said, hey man, you can keep doing this stuff over here if you want, or you can come help me change the world. It took 2 of those conversations in 6 months, but he also left all kinds of 6 figures on the table and came to work for, a very unimpressive salary to help me change the world. And so those guys are out there, and they'll buy into the vision of what you're doing. But also there's a group of young people. I mean, and everybody in between who came through Turbo Leadership, and we identified them, and that's just one of the ways we've done it. Between that and making compelling asks with a compelling vision, which you have, man, I'll tell you, those leaders are out there. And then my final statement on this is there's never enough. You're never going to have enough leaders, particularly in an organization that's growing like yours. There's never going to be enough leaders to do everything you want to do. And that's why at our church, every once in a while people will get to griping about this, but we all wear multiple hats. Everybody wear, it'd be nice. We even stopped talking about this. I was like, it's no longer a goal for everyone to just wear one hat because it's just never going to happen.
It's not attainable.
The top piece of your job description, every job description begins with all other duties as assigned. So no one in our organization says that's not my job.
Yeah, it's not in my job description.
Ever.
That's awesome. Man, this has been so valuable.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here like making all kinds of plans for things I'm going to implement and change and start doing better in Men's Alliance. This is great. As we start to land this, I've got a couple more questions.
All right.
What do you think one of the biggest mistakes that you see new or inexperienced leaders make? What's a mountaintop that a lot of people crash into?
I think the mountaintop that a lot of particularly new leaders who begin to experience success in their organization with their mission and their movement, I think the number one thing they crash into is their own ego. And for me, and I think this is worthwhile as a prescription for any leader, the smart thing to do is surround yourself with people who you trust and give them not just the permission, but charge them with the responsibility of telling you the truth. If how many churches do we have to hear about who have some pastor that leads the thing to become super visible, like everybody knows about that church, and then he crashes and burns because no one could tell him the truth, because he created a system that he couldn't even get ousted from. I tell our steering team members who are they're our board, and they're the only elected people in our church. They decide every year who's going to come on, and you serve for 3 years and you roll off. When I go meet with a prospective steering team person to make the ask, which I'm charged with, I didn't select that person. I'm just part of the team that selected them. So I would sit down and I would say, Dave, we want you to serve on the steering team. I'll tell you a little bit about it. And I would say this one more thing. You can't serve on the steering team unless you're willing to fire me if the time came and it was necessary. Because your job is to protect the church, not to protect Brian Hughes. I wanted that. I wanted that kind of accountability. I wanted that kind of system. I wanted to know that I'm not invincible, and that if I don't do my job, or if I get sideways, with my spiritual life in a way that hurts the church, that my job is on the line. I'm not entitled to this job. It is a responsibility. So I think the biggest thing is that most people run into their own ego. The other thing is what Jim Collins calls hubris born of success. So we start winning, and then we start thinking we can't possibly not win, which is also a form of ego, but it becomes sort of institutional or corporate ego. Like everything we touch turns to gold. Everything we touch goes up and to the right. Everything we touch succeeds. We can't possibly fail. You are in trouble if you have that attitude. You just don't know it yet.
Yeah.
So we used to have 6 physical locations, and COVID and one really bad hire on my part had that campus. We had to shut it down. And I grieved some about it, and some people got hurt in the process, and that's never a good thing. At the same time, the recognition that everything we touch does not always work is not the worst lesson to learn.
Well, that's good.
So I think those two things would be the things I would say.
Man, those are great ones. I like how you said not just the permission, but the responsibility.
That's right.
Wow, that's good.
That's right.
My last question for you is, for guys listening to this, that they're fired up from hearing this, what would you recommend book-wise? What should a guy be reading to grow as a leader, especially from a family spiritual leadership or church spiritual leadership perspective?
Yeah. Well, the answer might surprise you. And by the way, if I'll put in a shameless plug here in a minute. In 7 months, I'll change my answer, but I'll tell you about that in a second. There are lots of books that would get some immediate recognition as a guy's book. But if I had to say the thing that I think is most needed by men, there's a book written by a guy named Peter Scazzero called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality.
Yeah.
And I think that most guys live in a very limited formula of what it looks like to be a man. And that includes a certain Western culture on that, which is not a bad thing. I think there's much of that that's great.
Yeah.
But it often doesn't put us in touch with something that's deeply in our soul that God wants us to tap into, that cannot be reached without looking deeply into the events of our past that got us to where we are today. There's a whole lot of family mining that we need to do. And I'm not trying to psychobabble people, but at least to understand how did we become the person that we became? Mm-hmm. As John Mark Comer puts it, you're always being formed. Like you are being formed. It's not a question of are you being formed?
Right.
You've been formed. The question is, have you been malformed, and how have you been malformed, and how does God want to take that apart and turn you into the man God really wants you to be? I think Emotionally Healthy Spirituality is a book that every man should read. I think it's a book every Christ follower should read. But most men would have. My experience has been most men would avoid this book. It feels a little touchy-feely. It's really not. Now, my shameless 7-month plug is I wrote a book. I finished it. It's called Crazy Family, because everybody has one. How to be healthy when the family around you is not. And I came from a incredibly crazy family, like a jacked up, completely screwed up family. Maybe we can talk about that sometime. And I wrote a book about how do we overcome that? Because when people hear the story of my family, the first question they ask me is, well, how in the world did you become normal? Well, first of all, I'm still pretty screwed up. But how I began to function in a healthy way was a result of me learning some things, some techniques, and some things about understanding and then dealing with my family of origin that was super helpful. And I think it'll be helpful for a lot of people, and that should come out hopefully middle of next year in print.
Awesome. Well, we'll have you back on just to talk about that
That'd
topic.
be super cool.
And
Talk about your family.
Love to see that. Can't wait for it to come out. Emotionally Healthy Spirituality is one of my favorites. I recommended it to a guy just yesterday.
Is that right?
Yeah. It was recommended to me by Mike Flynn.
Oh, yeah. I know Mike.
A number of years ago. And can't recommend that one highly enough. It's got a bit of an intimidating name.
It does.
It's a mouthful of a name.
It does.
It doesn't sound real exciting.
Nope. Which is why. And there's a lot in my book. There's a lot of similar kinds of ideas. Mm-hmm. I think most people relate to Crazy Family.
But I think as soon as a guy starts to read Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, like the first page, you get excited. It's a story.
It is.
And you're like, oh, this book's way better than its title.
And you realize I'm in the story.
Yeah.
Because everybody can relate. When you read Scazzero's story, you realize this is not just his story. I mean, we all have a similar story to it. So
awesome book. We'll put that in the show notes.
Yep.
And we'll have you back on in 7 months.
I'd love to be here.
Dude, thank you.
It's an honor to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's an honor to have you here. I've learned a lot. Men's Alliance is going to be better as a result of this conversation today. So thanks. I love the fact that we can just have a conversation with a cup of coffee at our table that literally sharpens us, but then we can also share it via podcast with others so that we don't just take all this great advice and keep it to ourselves.
Yeah. Speaking of coffee, have you had our coffee yet?
No, I don't think I've
Why
had.
don't you grab that bag? You can take that home with you.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Tribe Coffee.
All right.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
That's awesome. I really
it's the only
appreciate
coffee
that.
I can drink black.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. Hey, I'm learning from you too.
Yeah.
I love what Men's Alliance is doing. I think you guys are changing the world, and I'm honored to be a part of it. Our church is honored to be a part of it.
Awesome. Thanks, brother.
All right.
To find out more about what we're doing and to join us on our mission, go to men'salliancetribe.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a 5-star review.